All right, so today's presentation is on tips for avoiding plagiarism. We're going to go through lots of ideas that aren't just related to plagiarism, that are really great tips for following the steps in the writing process. So I hope that you'll find it a helpful overview of the writing process as much as it helps you with dealing with plagiarism. The first thing I want to do is direct you to this link. So there's a lot on this page. I'm not going to go through all the tabs, but this is a guide that we developed in the Ally Center to provide students with resources for every step of the writing process. So links on how to read critically and research scholarly articles, pre-writing steps, steps for drafting, paragraph structure, effective introductions and conclusions, ways to incorporate research, citing tools, and some strategies for revising and editing. So when you get a moment, this is a great resource to explore. It's also a great thing to look at if you're in the middle of writing and you just need a tip on how to cite something or ways to paraphrase or summarize. It may also be something you want to look at when you're given an assignment by your professor and your professor asks you to do certain things. Your professor says, develop a thesis statement. There's a presentation here on thesis statements that might be helpful to you. So I would recommend that you bookmark this. It's part of the library's research guides. I think you'll find it very helpful. All right, so let's begin with a real quick discussion about plagiarism. I'm going to take you to the LBC student handbook page on plagiarism. Plagiarism is considered a violation of LBC's academic integrity policy. And as you'll see here, plagiarism is basically any submission of work, saying it's your own work, that's copied, paraphrased, purchased from the internet, borrowed from someone else, work that you submit for a current course that you submitted for a previous course. Any of these things are considered plagiarism without proper acknowledgement of that course. So please note that even something that's paraphrased, that you put into your own words, if these are ideas coming from someone else, that's considered plagiarism. And if you go on to read this, I won't go through all of this page, you'll see that there are very serious consequences to violations of academic integrity. They can start as at the level of failing an assignment or having to redo an assignment. It can go on to failing a course and could ultimately lead to academic dismissal. So we take plagiarism very seriously at LBC. And I've just written there examples of what plagiarism can look like. So like I said, using ideas in any form that are not your own without providing citation. You might be providing citation, but imitating the structure and content of another source could also be plagiarism because you're putting forward something that you're saying is your own thinking, but mirrors someone else's thinking. Like I said before, if you've done work for a previous course or another professor, and you take that paper and hand it into a current course, that can also be considered plagiarism. If you borrow some work from a friend and submit it as your own, that's also considered plagiarism. There's a link here. I'm not going to go into it, but it gives you a lot of examples of what plagiarism looks like. Often we think of plagiarism as just being copying and pasting from the internet, but it can take a range of forms, from putting something in your own words, but still not citing, or providing citations, but still following the structure of another source very closely. So you might find that second link really helpful to you. Any questions about plagiarism itself?
A question.
Yes.
Can you clarify submitting previous work? I can understand the concept of the whole paragraph, but you know, a lot of the subjects that we write about talk about similar topics. Are you how do you cite something that you've an idea that you used in a different class that is appropriate for a subsequent assignment?
That's a great question, Diana. And I've had students in that position. So my first piece of advice is talk to your instructor. So if you tell your instructor, you know, I use this article or this analysis for another class. Could I use that in my own paper? Very often I will agree to that because I like students to bring in their previous work and make connections between courses. And you're absolutely right. As you become more specialized, very often there's a lot of overlap between courses. So the first step would be to just be open with your professor about where you're getting your sources. And then the next thing would be that you would probably need to cite yourself. So in your citation, you would cite your last name and the page number or the title of your paper, showing that you pulled this source from something else you've written. So have a conversation with your professor and then include your document as a citation. Does that answer your question?
I think so.
Yeah.
I will certainly have a conversation in class about this topic.
Good.
Yes.
Good. Anyone else? Great question. Thank you, Diana. All right, we'll keep going. Now I'm going to talk about some tips for avoiding plagiarism. Very often when I work with students who've been caught plagiarizing something, it's often a time management issue. So they've waited until the last minute to write a paper or do some sort of assignment, and they're rushing and they start copying from the internet or from a source and not citing. And so the number one key to preventing plagiarism is managing your time effectively. Rushed research and writing is more likely to lead to plagiarism. I've seen this consistently. So giving yourself plenty of time is really important. This is a really helpful tool that I recommend to students. I'm just going to briefly show you how it works. It's an assignment calculator that helps to break down the paper from when you begin to its due date. So let's imagine that you have a research paper due. So you select research paper and then you put in the due date. So let's say my research paper is due a month from now. Now, the assignment calculator has broken down the timeline for me. Notice that by Friday, September 10th, I need to have understood my assignment and have begun topic selection. So you see that it's got my entire process mapped out. This is a great tool to kind of keep you on track. And not only does it, as you can see, map out your process, but it gives you resources. Now, a lot of these resources are linked to this university's website, but you can certainly find similar answers to your questions at LBC. They give you some research resources, suggesting that you add it to your calendar and so on. So if you're into writing things down, this may be something you put into your own personal calendar. If you're more of a virtual time management person, you can put it into your phone or on your Google Calendar. But anyway, I highly recommend this resource, especially if you've got some major paper that is assigned to you at the beginning of the semester and you have to map out the process and turn it in by the end of the semester. So one tip, effective time management. Second tip, correctly understand and interpret the prompt. So if you want to complete an assignment successfully, it's important to understand your professor's expectations. Know exactly what they want so that you can research, plan, and complete your writing well. So I recommend that as soon as you get an assignment, even if it's due many weeks from now, you start reading it, processing it, understanding what the professor's expectations are, asking questions so that you're positioned to complete your research and your writing well. Right here, I've linked a really good resource from the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill's Writing Center. And what I really like about this resource, I'm just going to scroll down and show you, is the list of questions that it prompts you to ask so that you really analyze an assignment and try and get a good sense of what the professor is asking of you. Also, looking at those active verbs. So if your assignment uses a word like summarize, what should you be doing? If the professor asks you to compare and contrast, what should you be doing? Those two types of assignments are going to look very different. So pick out those active verbs. The professor is using those intentionally because he or she wants something very specific from you. So make sure that you're looking for those verbs and doing what they say. So there are a wonderful list of verbs, from active verbs to relation verbs to interpretation verbs. Who's your audience? That's another one. That'll determine the kind of tone you use, the type of sources you'll use. So definitely go through this and get some tips on how to analyze a prompt and kind of figure out the language so that you're headed in the right direction when you're faced with an assignment. Any questions based on those two things?
Will the links be sent like after the meeting in like an email format, or?
Yes. So you'll
Okay.
get a link to this slideshow. And so
Okay.
all the links on the slideshow will be accessible to you.
All
Okay.
right.
Yeah, sure. All right. So we've talked about avoiding plagiarism by managing your time, by understanding and interpreting the prompt. And then I would say that the next really important step, which is a key process in the writing process, is developing a strong thesis statement. So for most of your writing at both the undergrad and graduate level, you'll be generally asked to take a position or develop a claim. So your instructor will want to know, what do you have to say about a particular idea, policy, issue, principle, debatable, controversial issue? Your professor may not explicitly ask for a thesis statement in the assignment description, but words like analyze, interpret, compare and contrast, demonstrate cause and effect, take a stand, evaluate, all of those are the kind of words that require you to craft a thesis statement and support it persuasively. So even if you are not directly asked for a thesis statement, you're more likely than not going to need one. It's really important to build a strong thesis statement as early in the process as you can. That gives you a sort of a filter through which to research, to decide what sources to use, and to start to create your argument. It basically creates a map for your research and writing. And that can be a great time saver. It also gives you a purpose so that you're not scattered as you're writing and going all over the place. This link right here will take you back to that research guide I showed you at the beginning. And as you'll see, there's a thesis statement presentation that's included right there. So if you go through that, you'll see some tools for developing strong, concise, powerful thesis statements. All right, so we've talked about time management, understanding and interpreting the prompt, building a strong thesis statement. Another tip for avoiding plagiarism is reading critically. I'm not going to click on it, but this resource will take you back to that research guide and give you some tips for critical reading, and even give you, actually, I think I will show that to you because I think that might be helpful. What I've done with this is I've given you a typical scholarly article, and I talk through how to read it critically. So the presentation has lots of good questions to ask, ways to take notes on the article, so that you're not just reading it kind of blindly, but really reading it with questions in mind, looking for purpose, looking for claims, looking for the way that the purpose is supported, looking for the way questions are answered, and so on. So that's a really helpful tool for reading critically. Reading critically means more than just listing facts and ideas. It also means recording your responses to them. So when you're reading critically, you're asking questions of the text. Why is this idea important? How does it support or undermine my thesis statement? That's going to affect whether or not I use it in my paper, or how I use it in my paper. How is this idea supported or contradicted by other authors in the field? Where in my paper will I use this information? It may be helpful to you to print out your article so you can write things down in the margins, or note things in a notebook or on a Word document as you're writing. What also is really important is any research that you're doing, you want to make sure that you're keeping the bibliographic information for it. So the wonderful thing about the library database is when you click on an article or you click on an ebook, it provides you with the citation information. Note that, keep that somewhere safe. So as you're writing, you have that to use for your citing. If you like a certain quote or information from a certain article, note the page number because you're going to need that for your in-text citations. These steps take time. They can't be rushed. And that's why time management is so important. Keeping track of where your information is coming from and how you're using it and critically reading it takes time. And that's why time management and reading critically really go hand in hand. Any questions? Okay, we'll keep going then. The next tip for avoiding plagiarism is using effective paragraph structure. We all learned paragraph writing in elementary and middle school, and it's amazing that the same rules for writing still hold true. I like to use this acronym TEST when I talk to students about writing. The T in TEST stands for topic sentence. Start each paragraph, or at least early in a paragraph, write a sentence that captures the main idea of that paragraph. Tell the reader what the paragraph's going to be about. Make sure that that topic sentence supports your thesis statement. So if you're writing paragraphs that have topic sentences that have nothing to do with the overall purpose of your paper, the thesis statement, then they're probably irrelevant and you'll want to take them out. So keep your eyes on the thesis statement as you're writing. First step, good, clear, concise topic sentences. T for topic sentence. E stands for evidence. Follow that topic sentence with evidence supporting it. Everything in the paragraph should support that topic sentence. If it's a point that has nothing to do with the topic sentence, take it out. Tight, cohesive paragraphs are all focused around one idea. Okay, so clear topic sentence, relevant evidence, adequate evidence, very often 3 to 5 points at least. Summary statement. Wrap up your paragraph, summarizing what that paragraph was about. Students often eliminate the summary statement, and you'll find that sort of reiterating the topic sentence gives your paragraph this really lovely circle form, and it's well-rounded and it's easy to read. Restate the main idea of the paragraph. And then finally, the last T, transitions. Not only should you use transitions at the beginning of your paragraph. I know a lot of people will start paragraphs with first, second, or furthermore. Use transitions within your paragraph so that the reader can see how one sentence in the paragraph is connected to the next. The test structure really forces you to think about the main ideas that you want to get across and how you're going to support them. Because you're doing that thinking consciously as you're writing paragraphs, you're going to be less likely to plagiarize because you are in charge of what your topic sentences are going to be. You are deciding what evidence you're going to use. You are connecting the evidence with transitions. You are summing up your paragraph with your own summary statement. It's all coming through your mind, your filter. You're going to be a lot less likely to plagiarize then. Another tip that I give students is to never start or end a paragraph with someone else's words or ideas, with a quote or paraphrase. Now and then it might be powerful to start with a quote, but in general, start your paragraph with your own statement of the main idea of the paragraph in a topic sentence. That allows you to direct the content of the paragraph. Maybe the quote or paraphrase is part of your evidence used to support your topic sentence. Again, though, if you're starting and ending a paragraph with your own words, your own thinking, you're a lot less likely to plagiarize, and you're really thinking consciously about the content of that paragraph. I won't click on it, but this link here will take you back to that guide that I showed you that has a section on writing good paragraphs. So as you see, all the basic building blocks of good writing are the tools for avoiding plagiarism as well. It all works together. Any questions at this point? All right, let's keep going. Another way to avoid plagiarism, incorporate research with analysis. What does incorporating research mean? It means more than just listing your sources or sticking in a bunch of quotes. You are actively tying sources to your own thinking, your own analysis. I had a picture of ice in that the slide before this, and that's because I like to use this acronym ICE in talking to students about how to incorporate research. ICE, start by I, introducing your source. Give me some sort of signal phrase telling me, the reader, who you're quoting or paraphrasing or summarizing. Dr. Jones states, researchers find. You don't just drop in some information without telling me who is saying this, who has decided this, who has studied this. So always I, introduce your source. C, cite your source. I'm not going to go into citation in depth in this presentation. We will certainly do that in a future presentation. Make sure that you're citing any idea that is not your own, whether you're quoting it, whether you're paraphrasing it in your own words, whether you're summarizing it. Follow it with a citation using MLA, APA, or SBL, depending on the program that you're in. So I, introduce your source. C, cite your source. And then finally, and this is often the step that's overlooked, E, explain your source. Tell the reader what the essential idea is of that quote or that paraphrase. Why are you using this quote? What's important about it? How does it tie into your overall argument? How does it compare with other sources? Do you agree or disagree with what that source has to say? When you explain your source, not only are you showing your reader that you're thinking about the information you're using, it's also forcing you, again, kind of like reading critically, to process the sources, to tie them with what you're trying to say, to using them to support your argument. All that thinking prevents plagiarism because, again, it's you doing the thinking, you doing the writing. This is not copying and pasting. This is a lot more thoughtful. This is a lot deeper. It takes more time. But I do think every time you use a source, if you think ICE, did I introduce it? Did I cite it? Did I explain it? This will really be very beneficial to you and to your writing. And you'll find that your writing will read a lot more smoothly. Sometimes students will put in quotes or paraphrase, and it will be kind of choppy because they're going back and forth. If you do ICE, you're providing a nice frame for the quote or the paraphrase, and it fits a lot more smoothly into your writing. Any questions about that?
I had a question when trying to like summarize like a manual. So like for school counseling, we have to do like the ASA, and
Yeah.
I don't really know how to put like my own thinking when summarizing like just like the rules and regulations of the things. So
Oops, I'm sorry. Yeah, I think it would depend on what the assignment asked for.
okay.
I think sometimes the manual, your professor may want you to quote it, right?
Okay.
So it'll depend on what the assignment asks for. And
Okay.
I'm not really familiar with like the details of the manual.
Mhm.
But even if you were to write a paper about a certain diagnosis, let's say, and you quote the manual, it would still be very valuable for you to then interpret it in your own words.
Okay.
This diagnosis is whatever, and restating what the manual says, simply to show that you're processing it and you're not just parroting the manual.
Okay.
Or if you have a certain thesis statement and the quote kind of proves your thesis statement, then you can say essentially the manual supports the point that, and you're tying that quote into your overall argument.
Okay.
Does that make
Thank
sense? Yeah.
Mhm.
Great question. Thank you. All right. So I've given you a quick example here that I also use in that resource I showed you. So it's an example from this article by Timmermans and Booker, and I framed it using the ICE method. So I start with I, the introduction, the signal phrase telling the reader who's talking. Timmermans and Booker state, and now here's the quote, "Partnerships between colleges and community organizations are multiplying as colleges and universities seek to meet community responsibilities. Christian colleges have not always recognized such responsibilities." End quote, citation. I'm using MLA formatting here, so I simply have the page number. I don't have the author's names because they're listed in the signal phrase. So I introduced the quote, C, I cited the quote, and then E, I explained the quote. In other words, which is a really nice phrase to use before an explanation, they believe that Christian colleges generally avoided engagement with societal and cultural issues, but have begun to recognize their role in the community. And that explanation has a little bit to do with what the rest of the paper says, but it's tying that quote in to the rest of the paper and restating it for the reader. Okay, so that's just an example of how to use the ICE method to smoothly incorporate research into your writing. A good combination of research incorporation has quoting, paraphrasing, and summarizing. Sometimes you have multiple ideas you want to put into your own words, and so you paraphrase. Sometimes you want to summarize because you just want to boil down a source into one or two main points. Every now and then, the wording in a particular source may be so powerful that you want to quote it, but you want to keep quoting to a minimum. Overquoting can also lead to plagiarism. Papers, particularly APA formatted papers, but all papers I would recommend as a rule of thumb, no more than 10 to 15% quoted material. Figure out other ways to say it, figure out ways to summarize it, and save your quotes for those really powerful lines that you want to include, or maybe you want to quote someone because they're an expert in the field. So save your quoted material for what's absolutely necessary. This resource right here gives you more information on quoting, paraphrasing, and summarizing. Any questions? All right, so the one we all think about and is key to avoiding plagiarism is citing accurately and completely. Make sure that you know what formatting style your course requires. MLA and APA have gone through recent updates, so you want to make sure that you're using the most updated style guide. Make sure that you cite ideas, either ideas of others, whether they're written in your words or not. Make sure that you cite references to the Bible accurately according to whatever style guide you're using. This resource right here, and I will click on it, gives you links to citing according to MLA and APA. I'll click right here so you could see a little bit more about what we offer. So there's a quick presentation on MLA formatting, as well as a template that you can use for your papers. Those of you who are writing in APA, I really like this tutorial right here. It's a slideshow put out by apa.org. And what I like about it is you can go directly to the section that will answer the question you want. Sometimes it takes a while to page through things in the actual manual. So if you want to know how to cite, how to create the right kind of headings, because APA formatting has very specific rules about headings, you can go right to the tutorial section on headings. There's a sample paper that's also really helpful. I often recommend that students either print that out or download it and have it on the laptop, so you can always refer to your paper and compare it with the sample paper. So lots of great resources right there for citing. And like I said before, library resources, articles, ebooks have a citation machine. So if you click the cite button, it will generate the citation for you, and you can copy and paste that into your work. Any questions? All right. So before I close up this and open it up for any other questions, I want you to know that the Ally Center and Writing Services is here to help you. And so I've included all the contact information for the various campuses. You'll get an email from me with these links, and then you'll have my email address too. So please feel free to contact me directly if you have any questions. All right. Any other questions that I can help you with?
Thank you for this information. I remember last class, you gave us a link where we can use words instead of using repetitive words all the time. You showed us a link where you can use creative words in your writing.
Yeah.
Can you tell me where that was again?
I wonder if it was the They Say, I Say book. Let me see if I can get us to that. Okay. I can't find the link there, so I'm going to look for it on Google and then show you. Timothy, I'm wondering if it's this book that you're referring to, They Say, I Say. I recommend this book a lot. It might have been the index that you're talking about. So if you go to the end of this book, and I'll explain the book. It's a great book on writing. Here we go. So the premise of this book is that there are lots of templates or phrases that you can use that expert writers use to frame research or to build transitions or to connect ideas. And instead of inventing all those words or phrases, they provide you with phrases. So here's an example. They give you a lot of different transitions that you can use that say the same thing. So if you find that you're always saying in addition, there are some other examples of things that you could use. Let me see if I can find another list that would be helpful to you. Here's a list of phrases that you can use to show who is saying what. So if you always feel like you're saying this researcher states and this researcher states, these are phrases that signal who is saying what and can also be useful for comparing two different sources. Ways to show agreement with a source. Very often you want to show that you agree with a source, but you can't use I. So I love the examples that they give that take out the first person but still express agreement. Like, X surely is right about blank because, as she may not be aware, recent studies have shown. X's theory of blank is extremely useful. So those are some templates for showing agreement with the source but still avoiding first person. Here's a really nice list. I talked to you about the E in ICE, right? Explaining quotations. Here are some phrases you can follow. So if you've given your quote or your paraphrase, basically X is saying. In other words, X believes. X is corroborating the age-old adage. This one I like, X's point is that. So that's another way of restating a quote using different wording so you can mix it up in your paper. Timothy, I wonder if this is the list you remember. Instead of always state, does that look familiar?
It kind of is familiar, but I just remember it was a link that you took us to. I don't remember it was a book. It was like a link, but it could have been this part here. So what book is this?
Yes, this is the whole book. I might have taken you to a link that just had the list. So what I will do is when I follow up this presentation with my email, I'll include the link to this as well. Because the book is actually, it's a great, I use it to teach writing. It's got a lot of stuff that I think you might find helpful. So, but this is just an example of, you know, when I introduce the quote, if you find you're always saying state or says, here's some different alternatives. And I really like the way that different verbs capture different tones. So X claims has a different tone from X deplores. X believes is different from X concedes or X demonstrates. So it's a really nice list to convey the tone that a particular author or researcher might be using. So
that's great. Thank you.
Yeah, sure. Thank you for asking. So I'll just make sure that I send the link to this PDF as well. Any other questions? Before I let you go, I would love to hear if there are other topics that you're interested in hearing about in a webinar, writing related topics. Anyone else have any topics that you could use a little extra webinar on?
I struggle with like the finishing and like the ending, like the very, very like conclusion of like the whole paper.
Mm-hmm.
The very beginning of like the whole paper, which is kind of sucks, but yeah.
So effective conclusions?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. There is a little bit on that research guide that I'm going to send you. It kind of puts introductions and conclusions together. You'll often, one real tool, a helpful visual, at least for me, Alicia, to think about is if you imagine the introduction as an upside down pyramid, you're going from a broad idea to a specific point, your thesis statement.
Mm-hmm.
Then you imagine your conclusion as a right side up pyramid. You begin your conclusion by restating your argument, reiterating your point, and then going broad, providing a broad application. Just like if you ever read, you know, in your field in counseling, APA articles, they often end by talking about the implications of the research and what other research questions need to be answered. So they reiterate their point and then they go broad. They talk about, okay, what's next? How does this apply to the broader field of what we're talking about? So just keep that visual of the upside down pyramid and the right side up pyramid in mind as you're writing your intro and conclusion.
Okay.
But yeah, that conclusions are important because that's, you know, the last thing your reader walks away with. So you want them to be strong.
Mm-hmm.
Any other topics?
Yes. This is Pamela.
Yeah.
I have just the reverse. So it is the beginning. Sometimes I have a tendency to put way too much information. And so I pretty much can get the end, but it is the very beginning of it. Lots of details, how, you know, things come together, how you build on it. And I love research. So the more research I get, the more I feel that I need to put that in so that it helps me, but I'm also thinking that it will help the reader or the professor, whoever's reading the information. So when is too much, too much?
Right. Yeah, great question. One thing, and maybe you do this, Pamela. So one piece of advice I give students is write the body of your paper first. So
Okay.
first figure out your thesis statement. So what's your purpose? And then write the body of your paper. All that research you're talking about, all that information really should be in the body of your paper. You don't want to
Okay.
give it away in that first paragraph, because then why should the reader read your paper, right?
Right.
So all that stuff you want to put in your introduction, in the body of your paper. Just make sure that you're using your thesis statement as your filter. So if it's interesting but not relevant, take it out. Then once you're done with the body of your paper, now you see, okay, this is where I'm going. I want my introduction to point the reader there. I want my introduction to guide the reader to my thesis statement. So let me just give a little attention grabber, maybe a question or an anecdote or a quote, and set the stage for what's to come. So you really don't want to give too much away in your introduction. If your introduction is veering onto the next page, that's probably too long. So that's sort of a rule of thumb.
Okay.
I like the introduction to keep the one page. Your reader also will be like, when is she going to get started, you know? So keep it to a paragraph that's a half page, maybe, and then get to the meat of your paper quickly. Great question.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks for the question. Anyone else?
Can I do one more other one?
Absolutely.
I think like to like like going deeper a little bit on like critical thinking from after reading like the paper, like our several papers.
Yeah.
And pick which ones can go with the paper and just interpret together just a little bit deeper.
You're asking how to make those decisions or how to do that?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, one tool that a lot of students like to use is the double entry journal. Does that sound familiar to you?
No.
No. Okay. So the first thing you want to do is put your thesis somewhere where you can see it so that you're staying on track. And then you, and this, you know, I like to handwrite it. I'm kind of old school with paper and pen, but you may like typing it. You take a paper and you divide it down the middle so you have two columns. On the left side, you write facts, quotes, paraphrase, information straight from the paper. So that's the stuff of the paper on the left side. On the right side, you write your responses.
Okay.
This will be useful for my conclusion. This contradicts my thesis statement. This reminds me of the article by Jones. This will be useful as a counter argument. Now, once you're done, you've got this great document that has all the stuff from the paper, and you should be, you know, writing page numbers. So if you have a quote or a paraphrase, you know where to go and find it. And on the right, you've got your responses.
Okay.
Now, let's say you do it with, you know, that Jones article. Now you've got two documents that you can compare and decide how you want to use them both.
Okay.
It can also help you with those synthesis papers. I don't know if any of you have had a synthesis paper yet. Those are often the hardest to write. They are not as straightforward because synthesis means taking more than one thing and creating something new out of it. So for a synthesis paper, you can't just list what one article says and then what another article says. You need to synthesize them, which means comparing them. How are they similar? How are they different? How do they both support an idea? How do they undermine an idea? Which one is more convincing and why? So that tool, which is actually used a lot in graduate writing particularly, that double entry journal that I just described can be really helpful for that kind of paper. That's a great question. Thank you. Anyone else? Well, thank you so much for your time on a weeknight in the middle of the week. I appreciate you taking time out of your schedule to listen to this, and I hope it's been helpful. When I let you go, I will wait till I receive the recording from Zoom, and then I will send an email to all of you with a link to the slideshow, a link to the recording, and I'll also include the link to that book, They Say, I Say, that I showed you. And I'll also put a link to that research guide because I referenced it a lot and I don't want you to have to go hunting for that. So I'll make sure I add a link to the library guide.
Okay.
And be looking out for another webinar, which I believe is sometime in October. And tell your classmates, encourage them to come. And please reach out to us if you have any kind of assignment, any kind of writing that we can help you with.
Thank you.
All right.
Hey, thank you
Thank
so
you
much.
so much.
Good night.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
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 Bye.